Hi, econ students. Welcome to Micro Unit 1, Basic Economic Concepts. Most of this is review, so I'm going to attempt to go through 5 concepts, so we are going to move fast. I'll let you know when it's not review and you should write some stuff down, take some notes. Here we go. Part 1, or Concept 1, is scarcity. You know this one already. Scarcity, let's not overemphasize it. For scarcity, it's an unlimited amount of wants in the face of limited resources. In other words, not everybody can get everything. It's just not possible. And this forces economies to make choices. Remember, this is the fundamental problem. If scarcity didn't exist, we wouldn't have to decide who got what. In other words, everybody would get everything that they wanted, and there'd be no reason to study economics at all, and this course would cease to exist. However, scarcity does exist, so we have to decide who gets what. And there's lots that goes into that, but we're not getting into that yet. Second concept. This one's kind of new. We've talked a lot about this, but it's kind of new, so you might want to pause and write a couple of things down. The resource allocation and economic systems. Remember, because scarcity exists, because there's not enough for everyone, as you can see in this wonderful picture, society must decide how these scarce resources are actually allocated or redistributed, right? We get to decide how that is. And the way we decide that is through answering 3 fundamental questions. Question number 1 is, what goods and services should we actually produce? We only have so many, so what should we use the resource to produce, right? In other words, what will actually satisfy people's utility or meet the goals of the nation? The second question that needs to be asked, or answered, I should say, is, how should these goods be produced? What combination of resources are you going to use or allocate to produce the goods and services that you decided need to be produced? Right? So that's the second thing. The third one is, let me make my face smaller. Who gets to consume these goods and services? Who has access to the goods you produced through the methods you use to produce them? It's the way we answer these 3 questions that decides or determines what our economic system is. If the government is responding to all three of these questions, we have a command economy. If individuals are responding to these 3 questions, they get to decide what's produced, how it's produced, and who gets access to the things they produce. Then you have a free market. If it's a combination of the government and individuals answering these questions, then you have a mixed economy. What kind of economy do you think the United States is? All right, let's keep going. All right. Command economy, or centrally planned economies, or AKA, this has a lot of AKAs, communism. What do they do, or how do they operate? So, centrally planned economies have a government or central entity that answers all 3 of those questions. They decide that all of the resources are owned by one group or one individual or one central entity, right? The reason they do this is they believe that individuals left to their own self interests are going to make decisions or choices that result in a more stratification of our society. There's going to be richer and richer and poorer and poorer. And so, to try and fix that, they say, let's take this selfish ambition away from people. Let's take the resources away that create that selfish ambition and instead put it in the altruistic hands of the government, who will decide who gets what and make sure that everything is evenly and equitably distributed. Right? So they answer all 3 of the questions. So the government owns your land, labor, or entrepreneurial ability, and capital. I said those out of order. Ah. So it owns all of those. It owns labor, it owns land. If you strike oil in your backyard, it's not your oil, it's the government's oil. And then they decide how they're going to produce, or what they're going to produce to meet people's needs, how they're going to produce those things, and who gets access to those things. So the best examples we have historically are Cuba, North Korea, still to this day. The former Soviet Union, although modern day Russia is becoming more and more like the former Soviet Union, or like the current day Soviet Union. And then China. China is sort of a hybrid. They're more of a mixed economy, but when they're a command economy, they're very, very command on certain things that line up with their 5-year plans that they create. Okay, but there are problems with the centralized economy, just like there are problems with the free market economy. The main problems are there are poor quality goods, right? The goods generally that they produce are not that high quality because there's not a whole lot of competition to keep the quality up. There are shortages, which is an issue. If one step and the production technique that they're using to actually create the goods and services falls through, another business isn't going to jump in and help out. It's all comes down to the government. So if any link in the chain is broken, then the good or service is not actually created, and there's a shortage in that society, or if they just guessed wrong, right? And then citizens are generally unhappy. The main fundamental reason that this occurs is there's little incentive to work hard. When everything is going to be given to you, you get access to all of these things just by being a citizen, and by working harder, you don't get anything extra. Why work harder? Right? You've seen this sometimes in maybe your classes where you're going to get an A no matter what you do. So why do more? So that's the idea. The incentive goes away, and that can create some really significant problems we'll talk about later. And then centralized planners actually have a really hard time of predicting what people want. I mean, just try, like, if you're in a relationship or your future marriage, just try and predict what one other person wants on a day to day basis is absolutely impossible to do because our preferences are changing every single day, let alone a government that has to predict this for an entire society. Wow, that makes it very, very difficult. So it's hard to predict what people want. As a result, you might produce a whole lot of something, but it doesn't actually meet the needs and wants of society. It's not helping us solve the problem of scarcity. Okay, pros and cons. We'll go through this quickly. What is good about a communism? This is the slide that puts me on the government watch list. And then what is bad? What is good is everybody's got a job because everybody's working for the government, and the government doesn't go out of business. Great job security. There's less income inequality, and that's a significant one. There's not You're not going to see a bunch of homeless people on the street because the government takes care of everybody. There's free access to health care. We put that in quotes because, of course, it's not free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, but we can talk about that later. But what is bad is that there's no incentive for people to work harder. Everybody's a trust fund kid. They all have a fortune waiting for them. So why work harder? There's no incentive to innovate because if you come up with a brand new idea, it belongs to the government. There's no competition, so products are generally poor, right? The government's not competing against themselves. And then absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So these leaders have access to all resources, they own them all, which access or ownership of resources equals wealth. And so it can create corruption. And then, probably the biggest and most significant one is there's few individual freedoms because you, as an individual, are a resource and you're owned by the government who has their own goals that they're trying to achieve. And so, why would I let you do whatever you want to do if it's going to get in the way of our national plan, right? This sort of nation over self mantra that China is famous for. Okay, now the opposite side of that spectrum is a free market system or capitalism. The free market system has a few characteristics. First is there's little government involvement. We call it laissez-faire. The government basically is there to make sure that nobody cheats, and it's there to make sure that markets are stable. That's about it, right? So very little government involvement. Individuals own all of the resources and they answer all three of the questions. An individual owns land, labor, their own labor especially, entrepreneurial ability, and capital. They own all four of those things and they get to decide what they want to produce. They can produce whatever ridiculous thing they want. And then society itself will decide who gets access to it based on who is willing and able to purchase it. So individuals own all of the resource and answer all three questions. The opportunity to make profit gives people incentive to produce quality items efficiently. What's this mean? Well, profit incentive is powerful, right? Individuals or companies that are producing goods and services are pursuing profit. Because of that pursuit of profit, they want to create the highest quality product that meets the most needs and wants, because that's going to result in an increase in profitability for them. And that will make, and they will want to do that at the lowest possible cost. And so that makes them work efficiently. In other words, they're always going to pursue producing more goods that more directly satisfy needs and wants, the lowest possible cost or the fewest amount of resources. They're incentivized to better solve the problem of scarcity every single day. There's a huge variety of goods that are available to customers as a result of this. And of course, competition and self interest work together to kind of regulate the economy, right? If you're trying to blow up the economy and push your prices really, really high so that you make a ton of profit, well, other companies are going to come in and undercut your profits and put you out of business. They self regulate, the free market self regulates as a result. Okay, now most economies do not fall into either one of those categories. In fact, almost every nation in the entire world is a mixed economy, where part of it is free market, the government intervenes in other aspects. And the United States is no different. We have government runs many different parts of our economy, and you probably are happy that they do, right? You don't want a free market army, for example. You want the government to control that and decide when to utilize the army, for example, right? So there you go. We'll skip this. We'll skip this. Three, this is a review concept, production possibilities curve. You know it well. It looks like this. Remember, it is concave or bowed out because of the law of increasing opportunity costs. As I produce more and more, specialize more and more in food production, I lose more and more of my clothing production because I'm now using resources that were formerly allocated for something else. In addition, if I have a point inside of the curve, then I'm inefficient. We call that point, we'll call this point G. Point G is unemployment. We're in a recession. We have a point way out here. We'll call this point H. Point H is unattainable. And then we know that this whole thing can grow. Or I should say, any point on this curve is productively efficient. And one of these points is allocatively efficient. Remember, productive efficient means I'm producing maximally what I can produce with my resources. Allocative efficiency is I'm producing what people want. So you need more information before you can answer that question. And then the outward shift of this curve is economic growth. And we know an increase in the quantity or quality of resources or a new technology is what results in economic growth. That's everything you need to know about that. Next up, concept four is comparative advantage. You know this one well too. You might see something like this, where you have alpha and you have beta. And these are two production possibilities curve. They're straight, which means they have constant opportunity costs, not bowed out, creating increasing opportunity costs. Here's how you do this. Quick review. Boom, boom. You create a little chart. You have alpha, you have beta, and then you have the two things they produce, which is grain and steel. And down here, I know that A, alpha, can produce 30 grain, which is right here, or 30 steel, which is down here. And B can produce 10 grain or 20 steel. Notice alpha has an absolute advantage in both grain and steel. They can outproduce B, but that doesn't mean that they should not specialize and trade. So the way that we do this is we set these two equal and we solve for one. In other words, we find the opportunity cost for producing one grain. So one grain will equal, we take other, remember ooh, output other over. So we take other, 30 over 30 or one steel. And then one steel will equal the reciprocal or one grain. Then I jump down here and I know one grain will equal other 20 over 10 or 2 steel, which means that one steel will equal the reciprocal or 1/2 grain. Now, my final thing that I have to do to figure this out is jump in here and figure out who should specialize in grain. And the specialization of grain is whoever can produce it for the lowest opportunity cost. So alpha can produce one grain and only loses one steel. Beta, when they produce one grain, they lose two steel. So the more efficient is alpha. So alpha is going to specialize in grain, which means that beta, if I use another color here, beta is going to specialize in steel because for beta, they can produce one steel for half of a grain, where alpha, it costs them an entire grain. But beta is going to produce steel. So when I look at this question, it says, hey, because of the theory of comparative advantage implies that alpha will find it advantageous too, well, they're going to export grain because that's what they produce and import steel because that's what beta produces. There you go. Let's keep going. Cost benefit analysis, the last concept. You know this already. Let's get into it. Cost benefit analysis looks like this. Let's use a very simple idea here. You're watching your favorite sports game or show, TV show, and you're unable to pause for some reason. I don't know. Those are the variables. But you want to eat pizza, and the pizza's in the other room, and you're not allowed to bring pizza into the new room because there's new carpet, and you're liable to spill your pizza all over the carpet. Those are the parameters here, right? But first of all, we have our marginal benefits curve. Notice it's downward sloping. When I consume one piece of pizza, I get a whole lot of benefit, like 9.5. And when I consume two, I get a whole lot, like 9. And when I produce 3, it's 8. And then 4 is 7. And 5 is 6. What's happening here? Well, every time I eat a slice of pizza, I get less and less additional utility or additional benefit. You know this as a law of diminishing returns or law of diminishing utility, right? I have less and less additional benefit because eating my fifth or sixth pizza is not quite as satisfying as eating my first. And that applies to every single situation in the economy. On the other side of it, I have marginal costs. When I consume my first unit of pizza, it doesn't cost me a whole lot. It doesn't cost me a whole lot of the show or the sports game I'm watching. And it also doesn't cost me a whole lot of money. But as I consume maybe my seventh or eighth, notice it's much, much higher. It's costing me 8 or 9. In other words, each additional slice costs more and more because I miss more and more of the game or show that I'm watching, right? So the cost continues to rise as I'm sitting there stuffing my face with my ninth slice of pizza. Put it together, and it gives you something that looks like a whole lot like demand and supply curves because it's these same concepts that we've been applying the whole time. Now, how many should I actually consume? You know this already. You know equilibrium is where you should consume. You should consume 5 units of pizza because at that point, your marginal benefit, 6, is equal to your marginal cost, 6. Well, why is that the case? Why is 5 slices the optimal amount? Because if I consume 3, at 3 slices, my marginal benefit is very high, my marginal cost is very low. And so I would actually, because my benefits are greater than my cost, I actually would continue to increase my total benefit by consuming more, right? So I will continue to consume, moving towards equilibrium. What about 7? Well, if I consume 7, my marginal benefit is very low, marginal cost is very high. If costs are greater than benefits, then I should consume less, right? I don't want to have a situation where my costs are greater than my benefits. My total benefit is actually falling as a result. So the optimal amount is going to be where marginal benefits equals marginal costs. Okay, a lot of review in there. One small new concept. That's it. You have 2 basic economics quizzes on Khan Academy that have been assigned to you. Check those out, complete them. That is all I have for you right now. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will talk to you in class.